Thank you, Thrastur, for your presentation. You could have said Ireland many times and had the same message. A past where the landscape was denuded of the native forest, where animals prevented the regeneration, a present where we wish to have the landscapes for tourism, and where we are encumbered with debt which is of unimaginable proportions.
No volcanoes in Ireland.
Sorry?
No volcanoes in
No,
Ireland.
not yet, but maybe we could do with a few for political purposes. Okay. Let me see. Can I do that? All right. I'm going to give you an overview of the climate, the soils in Ireland, because the climate shapes so much of what we have and what our future may have in terms of our soils. And I'm going to talk about soil degradation. Already today I've heard mention of things, and I'm saying, oh, why didn't I include that? Why haven't I made mention of that? So let's go. So, it was said before we became obsessed with money in Ireland that we talked about the weather. And it shapes so much of what we are in terms of our outlook on life, our poetry, our literature, our music, our obsession with the melancholy, perhaps. Here we are in the fringes of northwestern Europe, and the picture shows our typical meteorological situation. You see the big Atlantic low sweeping in from the North Atlantic that brings rainfall with it, and we regularly get this. Currently, what we call the Azorean high is pushing those high lows out into the North Atlantic, and we have really good weather, and we've had it for about 3 months. But this brings rain and brings a lot of it. I was interested to hear earlier say that in the Basque Country it rains a lot, and it's between 1,200 and 2,000 millimeters. You'll see, I'll show you, we've slightly more than that in some locations. And here it is. Here's our rainfall map, and one of the things that's very, it would seem to me very obvious about Ireland, it's a very small country, about 7 million hectares, huge variation in rainfall. You move in any direction from Dublin and the rainfall increases from about 750, 800 millimeters per year to 3,000 or 4,000 millimeters of rainfall. And that also varies locally with elevation. Okay, so rainfall is a very, very dominant process in the soils that we have and how they continue to function. Okay, sorry. So our soil's relatively young and very, very variable soil conditions, but you can identify some common threads in the kind of soils that we have, which of course spills over into the impact that different land uses have upon those soils. Okay? So acidification, because of the high rainfall. A lot of the time, rainfall exceeds evapotranspiration, so we have a moisture excess in the soil, which leads to movement of water and chemical and physical components down in the soil profile, hence the second bullet, the movement of clay, the accumulation of oxides of iron, podzolic soils, and something which is close to my own heart, conditions which are very, very conducive to organic matter accumulation in organic soils and in what I call organomineral soils, conditions associated with wetness, so very wet soils, and biological homogenization of the soil. Here's a simplified soil map. I should mention that what I've described as the biggest event in soil science in Ireland for 4 decades is about to take place. We're about to launch a new national soil information system next week, and this will become defunct. But you can see many things there. let's see. Is there a pointer that I could use? Perhaps not. Okay. But you see the grey areas, for example, in the northwest, the grey is peat. Some of the largest expanses of peat in northwestern Europe. You see the green glaze further down, situated widely throughout the country. This is where most of the forests are, on these peat soils, on these glaze. And located in areas where the high rainfall is. Okay. So, show you some examples of our kind of forest soils. A podzol, you can see the organic layer on the surface, the leaching, nutrient poor soils, many forests located on these, typically deficient in nitrogen. Glaze, very, very productive forest soils, incredibly productive, but wet, and the forests on these tend to blow down. And that's an important point to consider when one considers climate change. Thank you. So if I press here. Oh, yeah. So, peat in these areas here. So, and if I was to overlay the rainfall map onto the soil map, where the rainfall is high, where it exceeds 1,200 millimeters per year, that's where you'll find peat. Okay? So, rainfall is such a dominant process in our soil formation. Wet mineral soils here, and again, these are all the locations where our forests are. And close to my own heart, peat. Organic soils, which, to go back to the Icelandic analogy, we have degraded hugely. Very, very few of these left in the intact state. We carried on once we cleared the forest, then we started digging these to heat our homes, and we continue to do it. Just as the Icelandic Forest Service was founded in the first decade of the 20th century, so was the Irish Forest Service. For centuries previous, we had cleared the forest. We like to think that the British cut them down to build ships. I'm not so sure that that's totally true, but we started a situation here where there's only about 1% of the land area has forest. And probably it remained because it was just inaccessible and people couldn't get to it to fell it. Then we started planting with various degrees of success. The thing that really caused this explosion here was mechanization in the 50s and 60s. There's lots of things you can see through here, but you can see up to about the mid-1980s, the state invested in forestry, bought land, planted plantations on it, largely exotic species from the Pacific Northwest. Then with EU schemes from mid-1980s, the state was replaced by the private sector, private institutions, and mostly farmers. Okay? And many of these forests now have the native species because, again, the exotic species have fallen out of favor. Okay? So where are we at now? So, and it's an incredible statistic. People aren't often aware of it. The rate at which land use change has taken place due to afforestation in Ireland over a period of decades is remarkable. We've gone, we've increased the forest cover by about 10%. Okay? And a little bit different than half and half public-private ownership. Dominated by conifers and about a quarter broadleaf. Okay? And if there's one conifer that we really like, is Sitka spruce. Okay? Over half of our forest dominated by spruce and lots of other exotic conifers. Okay? Just to emphasize that. What kind of soils have we got? Something like 53% of all forests are on peat soils, and I've just given some categories of them there, the dominant one being blanket peat. About a quarter are glaze, okay? But beyond saying clay, we don't really have enough information about these. We don't know what proportion of them have organic layers on them. And it's a serious information gap, just that single point. And we really should be addressing it. The risks, major ones that I've identified here: erosion, nutrient depletion, acidification, climate change, loss in organic matter. Others that I could mention: degradation or compaction due to harvesting activity. Building of wind farms is another potential one. Okay. Erosion, we've heard mention of it already. We have relatively little knowledge about this. The studies that have been carried out, such as the example I'm showing you here from harvesting on blanket peat in the west of Ireland, it's not a study which was set up to measure erosion, but a study which was set up to assess the effect of harvesting on stream water. Okay? So it's not an erosion study per se, but it does suggest solid yield of solids in stream water from catchments after harvesting, increased after harvesting, could be due to the increase in water discharge, because when you remove the forest, of course, you've more rainfall arriving at the soil surface. It is possible to prevent the solid concentration increase after harvesting if good management practices are strictly followed. So buffer strips, harvesting during dry conditions and so on, all helpful to control this. Phosphorus is a more difficult one. These kinds of soils have no exchange complex like classical mineral soils. So when you apply phosphorus fertilizer to them, it can either be taken up or it will slowly be leached out of the system. And these systems continue to leak phosphorus decades after fertilizer application has taken place. Certainly it can be negative for stream waters. What it means for subsequent productivity is unclear. Okay? But if one is not able to apply fertilizer, it could be that subsequent rotations of forest crops would be deemed uneconomic. They just might not grow. Loss of nutrients and acidification. The assumption in our conventional forestry practices is that they are sustainable. So it's kind of, what a leap of faith to make. We're growing, we're taking the forest off. It's fine, it's sustainable, and yeah, let's not worry about it. Yeah? But there's lots of change happening. I was very interested to hear the point earlier, presentation about shortening rotation lengths. And rotation lengths have been getting shorter in Ireland all the time because of the demand for roundwood. And the average tree size at Clearfell has fallen remarkably. And we have a future where there's going to be increasing demand for forest biomass for energy. There's lots of policies around this. Our government wants to increase our energy independence, where nutrients are being removed from sites when all this material is cleared. So is that going to impact on us? Okay? The numbers are relatively small there, as you can see, but there may well be a serious issue in the future with this. And we've recently started a new project on this. My colleague Thomas Cummins at University College Dublin is coordinating this, and we are going to assess these exact questions. What does increasing biomass removal mean for the productivity of these kinds of sites? So, a pressing and important question. Loss of organic carbon, something which is close to my own heart. Okay? Peat soils rich in organic carbon. A third of the global carbon, soil carbon stock is in peat soils, which are in about 3% of the global land area. Disproportionate. Half of our soil carbon stocks in Ireland are in these soils. And as I just made the question, our glaze, we really don't know the situation with them. Okay? Peatland forests. You know, when I thought about degradation, you know, we've planted lots of forests, and other countries have similar experience. If you take a landscape like this, and there's probably very few people here who've set foot on an intact ecosystem like this. But if you buy a bottle of milk in the supermarket, there's more solids in it than there is in this, in the intact state. Remarkable. And if you walk out onto a landscape like that and you do this, the whole place moves. There's so much water in it. And it's a very valuable ecosystem. But we've planted lots of these with forests, okay? And I hadn't thought of it before. We've actually degraded the soil, okay? Because we have altered the functions that this performs, okay? And in the intact condition, these ecosystems will store about a ton of carbon per year, and they'll release methane, okay? When you put a forest on it and you drain it, that's the big impact. You alter that situation remarkably, and the soil starts to lose carbon, okay? And I estimate from work we've done in Ireland, this is anywhere between half a tonne and perhaps 7 tonnes per hectare per year. And when it occurs at that high rate, it's one of the few soil degradation processes which is visible to the naked eye over a period of 1 or 2 decades, okay? So, big change occurring there in the soil. Again, we really lack lots of information about this, okay? But lots of these forests are simply uneconomic. The productivity is just not worth it financially, okay? There are huge environmental problems associated with these areas, such as the loss of phosphorus that I've mentioned, okay? The difficulty of re-establishing crops. The product is not very valuable. Many of the sites are inaccessible, okay? But many of them perhaps are close to areas of conservation value. So we've started re-wetting some of these, okay? Where we take away the trees, we block the drains, and we try and get the water to rise again, okay? In the hope that over time, we'll bring this situation back to here. Now that's an entirely another discussion that I'm not going to get into, okay? But hopefully we can restore a carbon sink function and methane emissions will begin again, okay? So that we can, it is restoration, and that we can bring these back to what they were. We have a PhD student working on this currently, and hopefully that'll give us some insight into that. But I expect there might be a lot of this in the future, and it's a big topic in the UK and across Northern Europe also. So far, about 3,000 hectares. Climate change. It got me thinking about this. On the 12th of February of this year, a storm raged across Ireland, which was outside of anything anybody in the country had experienced within their memory. It was like Dante's Inferno when I was driving home from work that evening. And we had a number of storm systems over a period of about 2 months. And for example, 5,000 to 7,000 hectares of forest blown down in that period, okay? And when you put all these climate change strands together, okay, a paper published last week in Nature, Climate Change, Stormiest Winter on Record for Ireland and the UK, okay? Is this the future? Are we going to get more of these? Also, climate models suggest that the winters are going to be wetter. So if you combine a wetter winter with a stormier winter, are we going to have more forests blowing down? And if so, what does that mean for the soil and the functions the soil performs? Could it be that these circumstances will, in the future, force us to decide that certain locations where the forest is blowing down should really be cleared of forest and restored? I don't know, but it's again, it's a sleeping giant, and we should be thinking about it.